Hey all, so this video is about a very underexposed piece of fandom-grown art, and the people who made it are probably definitely going to end up seeing it. So I'm gonna say this right out of the gate for anyone who's watching who had a paw in this creation. This isn't a review, it's not a customer testimony, it's not a piece of constructive feedback. If I say something mean, it's not because I think you'll go and make better Celeste maps after you're done with the video. I'm an artist, and I build aesthetic intuition by articulating the feelings I have about art. You made a thing, it's a miracle that it exists in the first place, and I have lots of thoughts about it. Alright, on with the show. I have over 400 hours logged into Celeste, and just so we're clear, there's not 400 hours of stuff in there. There's a lot, for sure. It goes an unprecedented length after the credits, but not that much. Quite a few of those hours are just due to my habit of sitting down to replay all 9 chapters every half a year or so, but quite a lot more are due to my fascination with this game's modding scene, and more accurately, my fascination with one very large mod. Now, I understand that some people might be upset that I'm making a video about this game's modding scene while only talking about the single most popular mod on the Game Banana page, but the Spring 2020 collab is fucking huge, and I've only just finished it. A lot of the footage in this video is gonna be stolen, but this clip of me collecting the final heart is definitely 100% genuine. Over the course of this video, I'm going to try and argue for why this mod is interesting and worthy of study. So, first off, what is this and why would you want to play it? The Celeste Spring 2020 collab, or SC 2020, is a bountiful cornucopia of short gameplay experiences built for the Celeste platforming engine. 80 of them. It is at times excellent and at times completely unpalatable. It is at several points visually and auditorily beautiful as often as it is impressively ugly. But it's always interesting and no singular map overstays its welcome, except for this one. These levels, or maps as they're called, are all divvied up into lobbies, sweet little explorable areas that serve as hub worlds. Each lobby represents a different difficulty level. To describe it in relation to the base game, the beginner lobby will be mostly comfortable for anyone who's beaten the original game's summit. The intermediate lobby is around B-side or C-side difficulty, the advanced lobby goes up to farewell territory and a little beyond, and then there's 2 lobbies after that, where which you die and see the face of God as he stares into your soul, unblinking. Yeah, the modding scene for a precision platformer is necessarily going to have a bit of a heightened tolerance for frustration. It results in some interesting stuff, you'll see. I still recommend that you give this a shot though, like, if you've played Celeste and you want to try something else. The difficulty curve is remarkably well maintained for what it is. However, if you don't have a spare 200 hours, here's my recommendations for the unmissable Spring 2020 collab maps if you just want to peruse the best and or most interesting stuff that this mod has to offer. So, have you ever thought about how mods are kind of like fanfiction for video games? I mean that in several senses. Some of these maps are literally fanfiction. Crimson Knight from the advanced lobby imagines a prospective grim epilogue to the story from the main game, where the mountain's magic is somehow corrupted into a dark force. And if you manage to find all the secret keys, Madeline fucking crushes the mountain's heart at the end. It's pretty ambitious, but also far outside the norm for this mod. Many of the maps are given only the lightest of narrative justification, usually as a joke, and even more often there is no context at all. A majority of the maps in the Celeste Spring 2020 collab consist of Hugh being dropped into a pretty environment, or sometimes just something that looks exactly like a chapter from the main game, where you then traverse a brief series of platforming challenges with no questions asked. It's not fanfiction in the narrative sense, it's gameplay fanfiction. Playing all these maps by such a wide variety of authors lets us see many different interpretations of characters, like the dream blocks, green bubbles, and crumbling platforms. Rhythm Realm feels like a faithful emulation of the rhythm block section of Farewell, but it playfully explores more sides of this character than we see in the base game. Benign behaviors, such as the blocks simply not spawning if you're in front of them, are brought into focus with specialized challenges, in the same way a fanfic writer might be charmed by what they interpret as the secret vulnerable side of a cartoon villain. Meanwhile, in the expert lobby, Canadian interprets the rhythm blocks in a way that's completely foreign to someone who's only familiar with the canon. In Electric Exuberance, the rhythm blocks are utilized on a macro scale as timed sections of the map. The periodicity of the switches is very slow and changes arbitrarily to suit the design. There is no emphasis on internalizing a regular pulse anymore, only the constant sense that the ground underneath you could suddenly disappear. This is more so analogous to a fanfic where the goofy sidekick is rewritten as a gritty anti-hero. You'd be surprised at what characters some authors will latch onto. Do you remember that part right at the end of the core where gravity is lower and Madeline wraps around the screen when you fall? Well, Mobius Temple is an entire chapter taking place in that environment, low gravity and all. Was that a good idea? Well, I'm not sure, but someone had to do it. Even mundane side characters, like blocks that fall when you grab onto them, can inspire great things. Cave and Cavern loves those and makes a shifting spectacle out of them, the level dynamically shuffling its parts as you traverse through it. And then right before the end, it also does the core wraparound thing, just because. I actually like it a little more here. Benign details in the world building are explored and exploited, like in Thunder Temple, where pinball bumpers sat in the middle of dream blocks allow you to pause and divert your path. In Water and Ice, unnaturally floating blobs of water interact with your dash in strange, unexpected ways, acting as soft platforms and bunny hopping practice when spikes are placed just beneath the surface. Also, hyperdashing into these arrays of fine vertical stripes of water causes you to gain immense speed. The fanfiction analogy is wearing a little thin at this point. I just want to know how you even figured this kind of thing out. Unlikely pairs are made, like in Toxic Sewers, where jellyfish and dream blocks share the stage in totality for what is probably the first time, or spring pads and moving platforms on Cirque Maturano, or including both types of bubble in Lucid Caverns. You could name any two characters in a work of fiction, and someone will passionately explain why they'd be a great couple. For better or for worse. There's original characters too. This mod has OCs in it, new mechanics to come into play with the rest of the world in fun and exciting ways. Some of them, like the circular moving platforms and circular platform clutter, are so well integrated into the canon that I momentarily forget they're a fan creation, like how you sometimes forget that Sans is never actually depicted with a blue flaming eye. Play it again, his eye blinks blue and yellow for 2 frames and that's it. Some OCs are a little more disruptive and challenging to the status quo. Desolate Spire was a big roadblock when I first played this mod, even though it's in the beginner lobby, just because the extra jump crystals constituted a whole extra kind of thing to do in mid-air. Other additions would be better conceptualized as alternate universes, like the systems of light and mirrors in Blast Processing, transforming Celeste into something of a light puzzle platformer. Madeline herself is thoroughly explored as a character by this mod. Not Madeline the plucky trans mountain climber, I'm talking about Madeline the little bunch of pixels that jumps and dashes in 8 directions and is also trans. The character of her moveset, her hitbox, the way she interfaces with the environment. It is dissected further than would be practical or even advisable for a singularly authored work. We see several sides of her that aren't present in the base game. Sometimes, her moveset is reimagined entirely, be it in small ways like disabling neutral jumps or even disabling your grab or your dash. Other maps take a bit more creative liberty with interpreting the character. On Serene Skydive, you have infinite dashes, but they're really short, so it works more so as a small course correction that costs a little time. On Northern Lights, you have massive sweeping dashes that you can bend in the middle. It's weird. Error 418 from the Grandmaster lobby is my favorite example of this. You're given 2 stumpy dashes and a strangely shallow double jump that can be used for all sorts of wild mid-air speed tech. It's nuts. It looks like Celeste, but it feels like I'm playing a completely different game. That's one of the most interesting things about this mod. The degree to which these designers are beholden to the canon is very flexible and granular. Some mappers are steadfastly faithful. Azurite Ascend feels like it could be inserted directly between chapters 4 and 5 in the base game for how authentic its design is. Satellite embodies the supernatural intuition and direction combined with a paradoxical sense of looseness and freedom that I remember so fondly from Celeste's most difficult chapters. More often, however, the author's own quirks and preferences will be readily apparent. The platforming might be tighter, stricter than anything in the base game, and it might be broader, overwhelmingly without direction. Sometimes the movement is fast, twitchy, and humanly so, while at other times it is methodical and fiddly. Most interesting to me, however, are the maps that introduce entirely new rhythms and colors into the Celeste experience. Sometimes it is a flying success. Claustrophobia tastefully incorporates elements of puzzle platforming in various amounts across 20 static screens cut from the same cloth, each one a concise little treat that engages the twitchy fingers and the analytical brain all at once. Sometimes the experiment doesn't pan out. Ancient Tension attempts to bring Metroidvania elements into the fold, a non-linear experience where the same levels are met multiple times with different contexts. But it isn't non-linear. All of the nuggets of progression need to be taken in order, so it's just the really annoying part of a Metroidvania where you're wandering around the same few screens wondering where the fuck you're supposed to go. And sometimes it's Chill Out Mountain. What is this? Why is any of it the way that it is? Why would you do this? And even beyond that, some maps attempt to entirely warp the gameplay beyond recognition. These are my favorite ones to analyze. Mural Skies poses challenges that take place as prolonged, chaotic airborne scrambles, your dashes and extra jumps serving as a hand of cards you carefully manage. The dream blocks represent the constantly changing shape of the stage, such that nothing more than the first few jumps can be planned ahead. Mossy Caverns is this weird underwater puzzle map where the only real threat is an added oxygen mechanic, and it's just a chill time diverting currents. Some of these maps attempt to just turn Celeste into a puzzle game. Maps like Crystal Enigma and Coco. I'm not sure if this is the right medium, but I commend the novelty. Fun fact, Coco is actually in the Grandmaster lobby, so the solutions to the puzzles are also fairly tough platforming challenges, a combination never seen before and hopefully never again. And then there's Crumbling Castle. My beloved Crumbling Castle. I legitimately don't know where to start. It's almost unplayably bad. I love it dearly. It's like an adventure game, kinda. You don't have a dash anymore, although the author was clearly uncomfortable with this, as evidenced by the overabundance of bubbles. The platforming is unrelentingly awkward and cluttered, filled with odd contingencies and little troll moments like it's a Nintendo game. There's puzzle solving, I think. Does being told what order you need to grab the crumbling platforms count as a puzzle? The music is vibrating too high for me to understand. The final boss fight makes me want to die. It's one of those monsters from the mirror dimension slapped in a room filled with crumbling platforms that disappear whenever the hell they feel like it. That's exactly what I'm talking about though. It's fanfiction. The contracts you sign when you boot up a fic on AO3 is pretty fundamentally different from the one you sign when you pick up a published novel. This is expected, and the full-force experimentation on display here is beautiful in its own way. Okay, so this is all very cute and intellectual, broadly collaborative tinkering with a core rule set leading to strange emergent moments of beauty, but I wouldn't be talking about this mod if that's all there was to it. At the end of the day, I'm an artist, and I'm intimately interested in aesthetic transcendence. I always thought Celeste's main story relied a little bit too much on textual narrative, but with the broad experimentation of this mod, there is also ambition, a desire to communicate something emotionally that wasn't present in the original text. Designed without narrative, presented nakedly as itself, simply and transparently exploring its own aesthetic potential. This is how we get The Climb by Holly. The Climb has a very particular design ethos. The gameplay could be described as speed tech puzzling, progression seeming to be impossible without special knowledge of reverse hypers and mid-air supers. In this way, every push you make forwards feels like you're breaking out of bounds. There's no spikes, no ways to die outside of just falling off the screen, which surprisingly does quite a lot to subdue the inherent gaminess of a 2D platformer. The music is subtly gorgeous and somber, the visuals are subdued but dramatic at the same time. There is a grave scale to this map that I didn't think could ever be expressed in a game with just 2 dimensions. It feels as if Madeline has returned to the mountain after many years and found the magic to have disappeared. It's tragic, desperate, nothing happens in it. There's no text except for this cute little moment where you walk out onto a ledge and Madeline gives you some ellipses, and yet the design of it makes my heart cry out in anguish. That's the shit I love about fan culture. The cool, weird, impactful stuff that you can get from simply throwing a new authorial voice at an established universe. It's neat. Maybe it doesn't have the same curated professional design as a commercial title, but the Celeste 2020 Spring Collab will certainly give you many very unfamiliar emotions as you play, which is worth something on its own. So, if I'm going to talk about difficulty in a YouTube video about video games, I should just get it out of the way and let you know that I don't think I'm better than you because I'm good at Celeste. No more than I'd think I was better than you for enjoying spicy foods. Difficulty is a flavor like any other, and I think it deserves to be treated as such. So, going forward, I will be treating difficulty as a neutral descriptor of an experience, an aesthetic of play, because I think the Spring 2020 collab has a few very interesting things to teach us about it. The difficulty spectrum of the Celeste Spring 2020 collab is broader than any game that exists. 2/5 of it are made up of stuff that you won't find outside of very niche indie titles and ROM hacks. SC 2020 is aimed both at people who like Celeste and want more Celeste, and people who like Celeste but didn't think it was hard enough. Like me, I thought that. This is useful to examine in and of itself, because it serves to magnify the general design challenges that come from high levels of difficulty. Celeste, the base game from which this all sprung forth, is a broadly permissive experience. Even when it's hard, there's never an obvious, strictly correct way through any screen, which allows for spontaneous play that melds seamlessly with the greater focus on exploration that defines Celeste's main story. However, we run into a bit of tension as the difficulty level is raised for optional side content. Like, a large degree of player freedom necessarily results in lower difficulty, so that part of the game's identity ends up being cast aside as the game gets harder, and it kinda gets easier at the same time. I mean, the Summit Seaside is fucking hard, but most of it is down to memorizing the correct series of inputs. I never really felt like I had something insurmountable in front of me, because it was only a matter of time before I just ground up the entire level into inputs. Mechanical difficulty goes up, conceptual difficulty goes down. The Spring 2020 collab, with its absurd difficulty range, has to confront this dichotomy head-on. We get a lot of different answers as to what it means to raise the difficulty in a game like Celeste, and many attempts to maintain conceptual difficulty on the same turn. Some mappers just go all out and fully embrace the pure execution angle, like iamdadbod, whose maps are so strict that playing them feels a bit like pressing the correct buttons to watch a movie. Olden Tower Ruins was certainly challenging, but by the end, I felt like I'd binged an entire Twitter thread of curated TikTok clips. Like, the gameplay was simultaneously extremely intense but also brain dead. It's so weird. It's a combination of sensations you won't get from a commercial title, that's for sure. His maps also have this running bit, a dad joke if you will, where he'll just throw absurd amounts of neutral jumps at you. One of the screens in Olden Tower Ruins terminates with a sudden ice wall, and you bet your ass I died there the first time. He also made a dad-themed lo-fi punk album. Like, I just thought that was important to mention.
I don't need no map, I don't need no GPS, we're still good on gas, I'm not asking for directions, 'cause I'm not lost.
But I'd like to move on to another map from the expert lobby, one that might seem superficially similar, but approaches difficulty in a completely different way. Starlit Grotto is also a series of tight maneuvers with liberal amounts of speed tech, only sparing us of Olden Tower Ruins' near-constant dream hypers, but it's the tone of it that's completely different, a different authorial voice. Bissy is more interested in testing muscles you've never had tested in this game before, the aforementioned Desolate Spire adding a second resource pool of mid-air actions for the player to juggle, flooded waterways in the intermediate lobby toggling switches that instantly submerge the level in water, periodically switching between Celeste and the world's hardest game, the Flash game from back in the day, for allotted segments of play. Crypt of the Kevins in the Grandmaster lobby, putting underutilized movement tech into a delightfully uncomfortable spotlight. If I sat down and explained what I was doing in this clip, I'd start to sound like a Summoning Salt video. Starlit Grotto is probably my favorite Bissy joint in this pack though. It doesn't have any flashy gimmicks, and it isn't as bone-breakingly hard as their Grandmaster offering, but the tone of its difficulty is incredibly distinct. The main motif here is arcane pufferfish escort missions, those little guys from Farewell that get bonked around when you hit them from the top and explode them when you hit them from the bottom, the best mechanic in the game. In this map, they're arranged into complex configurations with springs on zip movers to form multi-step programs of bonking. A lot of the clockwork heart of this map happens off-screen, like in this part where you bonk a fish near the start and just watch it go off on a little adventure to the right. You don't even know why you have to do it, but it seems important. Oh, there he is. The visuals are overwhelming and muddy, including both cliffside and city spikes, along with large fields of electricity that turn the map into a sea of chaotic noise. He takes so much of this map on faith that there's a way through this mess, that whatever's happening off screen will work in your favor, but there's a surprising amount of grease and uncertainty to the proceedings. There are springs present that may initially look like they're for you, but they're actually for the fish. You'll have to put just a little more cojones into your wave dashes and wall bounces than you're probably used to. It wears on you a little, and when it's over, it feels like a more substantial accomplishment. Even though, I must stress, Olden Tower Ruins is handily the tougher of the two if you take it on a raw input level. The expert lobby is a fun specimen in general, because it's in a sort of middle ground. Rest assured, it's all incredibly hard. By the time you get to this point, you're officially cracked, as the kids say, or on the first stage of it at least. I booted up Watertown because this little icon here indicated that it was on the easier side of what this lobby had to offer, and was immediately greeted with this bullshit. But at the same time, it doesn't have access to the layered tiers of bullshit that they get to play with in the Grandmaster lobby. It still has to halfway resemble a game of sorts, while being harder than any game you'll pay money for. If you remember that dichotomy I built with conceptual and mechanical difficulty, this is where that relationship is most strained, because after you get to the Grandmaster lobby, you're home free. You can just make weird bullshit and have that be the appeal, but here, there's both a little less to work with and a lot more at stake. Sometimes, conceptual difficulty is maintained with a little gesture towards the awkward, the unintuitive, high voltage having you interact with zip movers mid-transition, sneaking in a use of that spring, leaping off before you're shoved into a wall of electric charge. Sometimes, a demand for precision is sprinkled onto actions that were surefire safe moves in the original game, every dream block in Blank Dreams having a specific optimal point for you to enter from. Sometimes, the intended route is so convoluted that figuring out how you're supposed to navigate the level in the first place is its own challenge, like in Trenches of Jellies or Switchback Station. And sometimes, it's Ligament. There is something evil in this map. The most colorful chapter of the original game has had the color sapped out of it. The music is a single unending dark ambient drone. The gameplay is... I don't even know how to describe it. It's just wrong. Awkward, fiddly, precise in ways that aren't apparent from just looking at it. When the lights fell and I found myself desperately dashing pixels away from a pile of spikes that were placed so incidentally that it felt unintentional, feeling like every gap was crossed only by the skin of my teeth, I knew I was experiencing something with a very precise vision. The gimmick to this map is jellyfish interacting with mechanics they should never interact with. Bubbles and floating blocks of water. It's hard to understand how you're supposed to do any screen even after you've completed it, because, again, this is a fan mod. It doesn't come with the same assurance of frictionlessness that a commercial title would. It doesn't have the same clarity of intent, because it's so eminently possible that the map is just bad, you know? Ligament plays with that tension very directly, and I find it delightful. It shoots precisely at the sensation that none of this is the way that it should be, that none of it was actually designed. And just so you know, it is very difficult for art to disguise the nature of its own medium. Funny Games has this one 11-minute shot where you just watch things slowly play out from a camera angle that looks like it isn't taking the actors into consideration. It's terrifyingly immersive as a result, like the fourth wall doesn't even exist. I want you to understand that this map, this Celeste mod, managed to achieve this sensation in a 2D platformer. And just in case you aren't familiar with advanced Celeste movement tech, which, sure, jellies don't just drop from your grip by default when you let go of grab. That's a neutral drop. You have to be holding the down arrow at the moment you let go, or Madeline will fling the jelly forward with all her might. Sounds simple enough, but when you're asked to do it like 10 times on the final screen after you've already been through this terrifying maze of spikes with no setups anywhere, it's searingly painful. It's the kind of trick that can be spoiled entirely by nerves, and they have you do so many right at the end. This final screen is several orders of magnitude harder than the rest, I swear. It's so long, and the spikes are placed so weirdly, it is more painful than Celeste ever dared to be. The background also just gets a tiny bit brighter here, like day has broken outside of the dense dark fog that surrounds us. Something is happening here, but I don't know what. I'm incapable of knowing what. It's a completely unknowable sensation. If the climb is a somber epilogue, then Ligament takes place after Madeline has been in a coma for 1,000 years and the mountain is completely unrecognizable. This map is very old and very slow. But again, the real galaxy brain stuff sits in the Grandmaster lobby. By this point, the Spring Collab has exceeded the bounds of this linear dichotomy I've illustrated, the mechanical difficulty becoming so intense that it becomes its own kind of conceptual difficulty. This screen from Tri-Peak Trail just about did my head in, this mash of flamboyantly Kaizo realness. It's an intense and exhaustive exploration of the dream blocks from Chapter 2, pulling apart the generous timing windows you're afforded for the jumpy dream exit move and contorting it into something unrecognizable. Conventional design need not apply in the Grandmaster lobby, because what would that even mean? What even is good in an environment like this, where whatever ass fuck levels you make will still eventually be beaten deathless by Parrot Dash? Well, in spite of everything, there's still a few unbreakable principles that these mappers seem to be holding to. As an example, a byproduct of Celeste's heavy leniency with its hitboxes is that truly pixel-perfect obstacles look impossible. I mean, you can make them, and many have, but it won't be readable without insider knowledge on exactly where Madeline's vulnerable heart lies. The Grandmaster mappers, for the most part, aim to maintain that sense of readability, and there are many creative examples of devilishly precise maneuvers that still give meaningful feedback with failure. One of my favorites of these moments is in the Heck 90, a map that was made from the word go to be the most fucked up map possible. On this screen, you have to wave dash over to this key token and then wave dash back. However, you're also being chased by Madeline, and through a lot of trial and error, I discovered that you can avoid her on the trip back by immediately pumping the brakes on that returning wave dash, holding the opposite direction after you begin your flight. Except, you know what Madeline does if you jump from a rightwards wave dash while holding left? So you have to make sure you're off the ground first, and then pump the brakes as soon as possible afterwards. It's very silly. The Heck 90 is also by the same person who designed Chill Out Mountain, and also that abominable fast bubbling level. I'd never know what the fuck this person is trying to accomplish, but I think that makes them a good designer. The Grandmaster lobby is also, naturally, prone to a few ungraceful attempts to reach that level of difficulty as well. Some of these maps seem like they're actively looking for reasons to justify being this far up in the difficulty spectrum. Aquatic Underground feels like it's exactly one testing pass away from being demoted to the expert lobby. The movement looks unimpressive, but upon playing the map, you'll discover several invisible precision choke points that definitely would have been sanded off if it wasn't made to actively court Grandmaster players. On a different token, Forest of the Ancients is present in the Grandmaster lobby solely because every screen lasts a goddamn year and there's like 10 of them. I'm sorry, Dad, I didn't like this one. But there's also a few divinely inspired visions for what ultra high level difficulty can look like in this engine. Like in what is among my favorite maps in this pack, Temporal Tower. The main gimmick with Temporal Tower is that you exclusively get around via springs that kill you if you don't dash out of their arc. Spring cancels, as they're called. I feel like I can't even properly comprehend what a genius level design move this is, but I'll try. Okay, so the problem I have with tech spam style maps like Olden Tower Ruins is that the spikes are just for show. Like, you can die on them, Lord knows you can die on them, but it won't be because you didn't maneuver through them carefully enough. You die in Olden Tower Ruins because you didn't hit one of the Dream Hypers. The spikes are there to enforce the sequence of speed tricks you have to perform in sequence. Performing these correctly sends you sailing through the tight spaces as if the spikes lining the walls aren't even there. In this sense, the difficulty of Olden Tower Ruins feels a little hollow to me. The hardest part of this room is remembering to extend this particular midair super dash a little further than you think you should. By contrast, every stray death zone in Temporal Tower is real. You have to actively interrupt every one of those automatic arcs you're sent on by the springs at a specific point. At every point in this interaction, you are distinctly aware of the hot space surrounding Madeline. It's so good. It's also really fucking hard, but it's a good hard. It's a difficulty that's resistant to the kind of compartmentalizing that can happen with this sort of overly strict gameplay. Christ, for the first time ever, I'm halfway through a minute-long screen I've attempted 1,000 times, and I'm not dozing off. Temporal Tower made the Grandmaster lobby grind worth it. Like, it's genuinely such a great, fun experience. It's 3 screens long, and I died 3,000 times. I loved every second of it. Fish Hell does something pretty similar, albeit less elegantly. Instead of springs, it's the upward boost you get when you bonk the fish. The first room has you bonking one fish, and then dashing down to intercept its path almost immediately afterwards. And then this evil portion where you have to dash sideways basically instantly after each consecutive fish bonk in order to avoid the shallow ceiling of spikes, and then they throw in a Mixmaster Theo crystal screen for the hell of it. You don't have to do any neutral drops though, so it's not that hard. However, I'd be an absolute fool if I forgot to mention the other main way that modding communities primarily like to step up the difficulty of their favorite games. That's right, it's time for Mini Essay, Discerning the Value of Canonizing Speedrun Tech, Part 2 because none of you can behave. Some of you might remember the segment in my Marble Blast video where I laid out the framework for analyzing speedrun tech from a design standpoint. Essentially, when speedrun tech is canonized, used as intentional game mechanics, they ascend from the theoretical uncurated space of speedrunning into a formally designed space of authorial intent. In the context of speedrunning, all mechanical interaction that lets you go fast is created created equal. It's all an emergent space beyond the game, where any notion of authorial curation is meaningless. I argue that in the context of custom levels, works of art created by people who are actually expecting you to interact with it in a particular way, speedrun tech can be well designed or poorly designed. This is why Farewell teaches you how to wave dash instead of how to extended hyper. It was a deliberate choice by Maddie. It's the better designed mechanic. Watch the Marble Blast video. It's easily my best one. SC 2020, as I've discussed, is an aggregate creation made of dozens of small experiences helmed by dozens of authors with their own preferences and personal stomach for jank. So, there's no way that this wasn't going to exhaustively plunder the game's engine for whatever emergent behavior could be exploited. Let's take a look and see what we can learn from this experiment. The advanced lobby is the first point in this mod that you're really asked to exceed the skills necessary to fully complete the base game. The beginning of the end, really. It's also the first time you're expected to learn movement tech that is never required of you throughout the entirety of Celeste, but it starts out pretty simple. Take neutral jumps, for example. Neutral jumps fucking suck, and I wish they weren't in the game. Neutral jumps, or neutrals, are how you scale walls without grabbing them and spending stamina. If you jump off a wall without holding any directional buttons, you'll do a light tap off the wall instead of kicking away from it. Combining this with a quick course correction back means you can just climb walls indefinitely. No grabbing required. This effectively replaces stamina management and jumping ingenuity with two buttons that you press in a rhythm you just learn over time. Stamina management. This godforsaken room in Ferocious Sanctuary is either piss easy or the most annoying thing you'll ever play in a game, depending on whether the arbitrary timing of this one repetitive action is suitably baked into your pause. There is no in between. Another very common feature of this mod starting at this point is reverse hypers. And this feels weird to say because I've done so many of these that it's just second nature now, but they're unintuitive as hell. Like, dashing at the ground and then shifting gears mid-dash before you jump so you can preserve your momentum in the opposite direction. It feels like entering a combination on a lock more so than a process of gaining speed. Ferocious Sanctuary is easily the most tragic casualty of the speed tech as design modding pitfall. Like, I heard a lot of people say this is one of the more difficult maps in the advanced lobby, but if you know the 3 or so tricks up its sleeve, then it'll just play itself. I'm sorry, Dad, it relies solely on whether I can do neutral jumps or not. It's not interesting. The expert lobby is when things properly start going off the rails. Like, we've properly dunked ourselves into the harsh mod soup at this point. Celeste players in the audience probably remember when the old site B-side revealed that you can jump while exiting the dream blocks, but did you know that you can hyper out of them too? You gotta do it a little later than you think. It's incredibly awkward. And then, Blank Dreams asks you to do it 10 fucking times in a row. The Celeste community tends to associate certain tech with certain difficulty levels, and as such, SC 2020 introduces a new palette of obscure movement tech with each new lobby in the form of a gym. Because of this stratification, these gyms begin to feel less like training areas and more like you're just being introduced to the new list of things that mappers are going to be shoehorning into their maps in order to justify their position in this difficulty. Like, when the Expert Lobbies gym taught me that you can get more distance from bumpers and fish explosions by holding the direction away from them upon contact, my first thought was just, oh, I guess that's what they're expecting me to do with every bumper and fish in the game now. And I was right. Well, not always right. There's exactly one corner boost spot in the whole expert lobby, and it's in an optional room that I missed the first time around. Hyper bunny hops are taught in the expert lobby gym, and they appear I think they just don't show up here. Was I supposed to do one at this part of Electric Exuberance? Actually, while we're talking about hyper bunny hops, I was really expecting there to be more of them. It's fiddly and difficult, but it makes sense. The thread of logic is maintained. Following a little hyper dash with a big jump feels like it should give the speed of the first and the height of the second. There's only one map that really extensively uses them, Crypt of the Kevins. It's one of my favorites. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The expert lobby also introduces us to ultras. I have had a lot of time to think about ultras while playing this collab. It's like the lingua franca of this game's super high difficulty levels. Any map touting an excessively high skill floor will use them almost as often as wave dashes are used in advanced level maps. God, where do I even start? Well, I guess I can try starting where the mod does, with the little tutorial they wrote for it in the Expert Lobby's gym.
To understand how ultras work, we need to outline a few things first. Every time Madeline down diagonal dashes, she gains a 1.2 times speed boost upon landing on the ground. Every time Madeline dashes, it lasts 0.25 seconds before ending. Top, if you land on the ground and jump before your dash ends, Madeline will do a wave dash, resetting all built-up speed. Middle, if you land on the ground and jump as your dash ends, Madeline will grind to a halt. Bottom, if you land on the ground after your dash ends, Madeline will gain the 1.2 times speed boost and have a normal height jump.
Wow, this is useless. I mean, now that I'm actually getting kind of good at ultras, I can recognize that they technically recounted most of how the trick functions here, but the first time I got to this point, it was just complete gibberish. It's got all the components, but it doesn't communicate what any of it actually means from a practical standpoint. Terminal speedrunner brain. So, provided I have the facts straight, there's two components to an ultra. The first, and also the most immediately obvious one for the player, is the oblique angle that you travel on when you dash diagonally downwards at speed. The second half is then jumping off of the ground without the game thinking you're trying to do a wave dash and getting confused. The sooner you dash down, the more speed you preserve, and to make use of that speed and get the magical 1.2 times boosts they mentioned, you must hit the ground at some point after the dash is over, but preferably right after. And refrain from buffering your jump. Yeah, that's the first piece of important information that this tutorial just doesn't get across. Celeste has trillions of little artificial timing window affordances hard-coded into its movement, including a system where pressing the button a little before Madeline actually hits the ground will still result in a jump. Ultras, on the other paw, are a fucking mad science accident, so they don't afford you the same courtesy. It is the most common way that you'll mess these things up, speaking from experience, and if you don't know that's why it's happening, then it'll just read as your input's getting 8 half the time. Update. Upon reading the script, a parrot has told me that there's actually a 1 in 3 chance that you'll get the speed boost even if you buffer an ultra. Parrot Dash has also cleared D1, D7, so I think he's just used to this kind of thing. The result of ultras having different timing rules to every other interaction in this game is that ultras will almost invariably stick out like a sore thumb in any maps they're used in, because they represent a brief visit to a version of Celeste that isn't as well programmed. The Celeste movement engine is slavishly tuned to recognize the player's intention and not simply their inputs. Except here. Ultra Sandwich is the worst case scenario here, assuredly. Like, it's average, actually kinda easy for an expert lobby map, but exactly once per screen, and no more, you get to do an ultra. This weird trick that looks kind of like a wave dash, except the timing windows are completely alien. Every single ultra in this map is out of place. It's so awkward. Ultra Sandwich was also made to be beatable by a robot at light speed, which has to count for something. But there's another very important thing about ultras that this tutorial leaves out. And it'll become clearer as I shift gears and talk about some more maps. First up, Ultra Difficult by Bob Dole. Oh, Bob Dole. What's that? You didn't think I was going to talk about Ultra Difficult? Well, neither did I, but at some point during the production of this video, I got cracked and cleared every Grandmaster map, and I have takes. So, if you haven't noticed, this mod has a pattern of associating speed tech directly with difficulty. The difficulty meter, especially on launch day, was essentially a meter for how much of that difficulty's speed tech was present. For a hot minute, Tri-Peak Trail was marked as red because of this one chained ultra. Ultra Difficult's difficulty meter is pushed so far that it's cracked, so naturally it's an exuberant candy box of esoteric speedrunner bullshit. You could make a whole essay about all the strange things this map asks you to do, so I'll just focus on the very first screen for now. I'm not lying when I say this screen took me like 2 hours to get right. It opens with an ultra that's performed on the ground, which normally doesn't do anything except for when you grab something before the second dash can finish and cancel your momentum. And then, after you've gotten the maximum speed with the jellyfish, you gotta throw it backwards and use the minuscule speed boost you receive from that action to dash diagonally down an ultra with that speed. So for those at home, you dash down at the ground, jump, dash again as soon as possible after, grab the jellyfish, jump, let go of down and press left so you don't neutral drop the jelly, release jelly, immediately dash down again, and don't buffer your fucking— the next trick is so bad that it wraps around to being funny again. Those blocks from chapter 8 that go bawumph and launch you away from their center apparently have 4 frames as they break where the game considers you to be standing on solid ground and you can hyper off of it. There's no feedback, no way to learn it without simply drilling the timing into your skull. Parrot Dash, if you're watching this, this doesn't count. Is this fun? I don't know, I think that's the wrong question to ask here. Like, I wouldn't say I'm having fun when I fail this impossibly tight reverse hyper into an Ultra, and just to get here I had to hit a 4-frame window core super, a 4-frame window core
Ultra,
hyper,
Ultra,
and a
jellyfish
Ultra
ground
boost.
boost.
Fuck this
Another
quarter
ground
round
jelly.
Don't forget to jump at the end for the 15th goddamn time. But I still think there's an interesting aesthetic idea being exercised here. Just take a survey of the way the map looks, a completely abstract, formless color void. Even Madeline herself is abstracted, a blank set of pixels that bluntly indicate the game state rather than representing a character. This is a good idea for what the map is going for, which is to say, it was a good idea when Dust Force did it, which is what this map is referencing. The endgame challenges of Dust Force also opted for an abstract look. Giga Difficult using the same purple and orange color scheme that Ultra Difficult did. I like this choice. It feels like a more honest representation of the relationship you've built with the designers at this point. I imagine that by the time you reach this level of competence and familiarity with the game, it's not really a game about a wily band of janitors cleaning up leaves anymore. You're an object, maneuvering around a space, interacting with stuff to increase your score. On the same token, playing Ultra Difficult made me struggle to remember a time that I ever authentically felt as if I was playing as a plucky trans mountain climber with anxiety. By purposefully extricating narrative interpretation, making the map entirely abstract in a way that is itself just a reference to Dust Force, the map becomes more of a direct dialogue between player and designer. There's some parts that you straight up won't be able to complete if you don't have an answer to the question being posed. I had to look at someone's stream and study their Twitch overlay input display frame by frame to figure out how to do this part, where you hyper and then dash diagonally into the ground so you can Tokyo drift into this crevice, but that's the entire point. It's a dialogue. It's a fourth wall break. Anyways, after that, I played Heart of the Storm by Canadian, the other hardest map in the mod. Heart of the Storm is, by contrast to Ultra Difficult, not an abstract grab bag of speed tech. It's actually very focused and disciplined. It's the Chained Ultra map, the high-speed extreme input density map. It has a distinct, direct, and representational aesthetic vision. It's a storm, chaotic, imposing yet impartial. This is exactly what I'd expect the Chained Ultra map to look and sound like. The first screen after the tutorial is the hardest. Or so I'm told. I fluked this one in under an hour, but it's also the shortest, a mash of inputs that reportedly take some people hours upon hours to adequately perform, stinging your face like sheets of rain. The screens afterwards get longer and progressively grow more relaxed. Or so I'm told. This stupid cloud tech screen had me stuck for 2 consecutive afternoons, climaxing with this nightmarish jellyfish screen, operating in that same arcane, mostly off-screen fashion as the fish mechanisms in Starlit Grotto, but far bigger and slower. The storm is dissipating, yet the magnitude of it only grows more apparent with distance. This is so fucking cool. It's so cool. I love that even in this no man's land of extreme difficulty, there can still be dramatically incisive aesthetic statements like this. I'm so delighted that my experience of beating every Grandmaster map in ascending difficulty was allowed to culminate with 2 maps that are this different, that are this interesting. But the other thing that you should know about Ultras, yeah, we're still in the mini-essay, the timing is dependent on how the mapper was feeling that evening. Remember, it's easy to confuse the game into thinking you're trying to do a wave dash. If your down dash is intercepted before it ends, you'll lose the momentum. Consequentially, whether each platform is 4, 3, or 2 tiles down has severe ramifications for how long you need to wait after the jump before you dash. And as it turns out, these 2 maps have very different ideas for how Ultras should work. The Ultras in Ultra Difficult are, ironically, kind of lax. You'll actually undershoot most of them if you try to dash down as soon as possible. The Ultras in Heart of the Storm, however, gotta be fucking on the dot. Usually anyways, they actually change it on the fly a couple times. These first Ultras on screen 2 are inhumanly tight 4-tile ones, while just a little later you're given some looser 2-tile ones, just to keep you on your toes. This optional screen off to the side of screen 3 changes it up on an ultra by ultra basis. Speedrunners must be stopped. But like, I don't know, if it didn't have that variety, Ultras easily could have ended up just being fast neutral jumps. I was ready to call them fast neutral jumps until I played Heart of the Storm, and it was the most fun I had ever had playing this game since Farewell dropped. It's prickly, engaging, multifaceted, with a greater sense of onboarding and feedback for failure than I could have ever imagined for something like this. God, how does this still resemble a game? How am I still going at this with a classical design sensibility while still being rewarded for it? I don't know, but maybe this can inspire you game devs out there to aim a little higher on the difficulty meter with your own projects, because there is a surprisingly rich breadth of artistic problems and solutions to discover. At least, try aiming higher than Celeste did. I wanted to end this video with one of those big video essay conclusive statements, but my mind kept on returning to the little things. I love this moment right at the start of Abandoned and Ruined, where you're just gently reminded that extended supers are a thing you can do, and then the map quietly ends with you doing a second one. I love this one bit in Fish Hell where I was expected to hold both jump and grab simultaneously for the first time in my life. I love how Temporal Tower's rooms have cheese ability progression, with the first room having a huge skip and the last one being virtually uncheesable. I love how Ultra Difficult managed to have some rooms just completely shift in layout depending on whether you went for the strawberry paths or not. I am just immensely delighted that I went on this whole irresponsibly long journey and I never stopped discovering moments of pure curious ingenuity. I love that the hardest room in the entire mod is just sitting off in some corner of Heart of the Storm, and it's more optional than optional. You don't even get a strawberry, it's just a nice view. I didn't come close to beating this one myself. It's just a bunch of incredibly tight ultras and corner boosts in rapid succession, which you might know as never buffer and must buffer. I'm pretty sure the dash for this upwards corner boost is frame perfect, or close to it. I don't know. Maybe I'll grind this guy out someday, but for now I am oddly comforted by the knowledge that it's just out there, you know? It's the nice view. I loved slowly coming to recognize certain names as they appeared in the credits before levels, seeing that Moon was credited with decorating the map and knowing that it was probably going to burn my eyes out. I loved the growing familiarity I began to feel with these authors and their design styles. iamdadbod with his speed tech spam and complimentary strawberry that's essentially free but burdens you with the stress of carrying a strawberry for 2/3 of the screen. Bissy's exploration into unfamiliar mechanics and rhythms that still manage to feel distinctly gamey. Figure 90's wild experimentation that results in 3 of the worst maps in the collab and 2 of the best. I loved the music, both original and borrowed. You've been hearing it playing in the background for this entire video. I loved Marshall's 90s IDM chic beats with piano melodies that stand up to most of the stuff from the original game's OST. I loved how Figure 90's tracks barely ever fit into the levels they were made for, even though they're pound for pound probably the best songwriter here. I love how Seth was typecast as the composer for water levels 3 times out of 3. I love Tortoise's cursed D&D music that goes on wild, goofy excursions and tempo changes. I love Zachary Talus's harrowing, dark ambient, which shouldn't work for a precision platformer, but somehow always does with how it's used. I loved exploring the lobbies before I'd even played any of the maps, each one with its own distinct little vibe and personality. I love how the higher difficulties start to include modestly difficult platforming while you're navigating between maps. The level select screen is bullying me. It's so cute. I loved systematically clearing every map in each lobby, collecting every mini heart, unlocking the final challenge, a heart side, a communally built test of endurance, where I got to revisit each of these little experiences one last time before moving on to the next difficulty. I loved all of the ways in which they managed to condense the essence of these maps into such short, sweet little reminders. I eventually found myself trying to picture how these maps would be translated into the heart side while I was playing them. Like, what do you do with Crumbling Castle? This strange, cluttered, humorous little adventure. Well, Tortoise actually managed to insert a brief little joke in there, seeing a bunch of seekers and then immediately crushing all of them with a rock. Tri-Peak Trail is a map that splits itself into 3 segments with 0 cohesion, the aforementioned Kaizo-ass dream blocks, an incredibly jank high-speed Kevin room, and an incomprehensible jellyfish escort mission. Imagine my delighted dismay when I reached its portion of the Grandmaster Heartside and discovered that I would be doing all 3 at once. Jank high-speed Kevin tech leading into Kaizo-ass dream blocks with at least 2 active jellyfish flying around at any given time. I love it so much, it's terrible. These heartsides turn this collab into something almost impossibly cohesive, each one placed as a gentle step up in difficulty from the rest of the lobby you just completed, all a fitting challenge in their own right for each stage of skill development one would experience while playing. They are tonally intimately engaged with the text they reside in. The beginner heartside is optimistic, beautiful, the first step into this communal art project and a hint of what's to come. The intermediate heartside is a dark turn, the yawning trailhead of a much longer journey that you're now committed to. The advanced heartside is an exalted leap into the unknown, the first monumental challenge that the original game couldn't have prepared you for, epic and swirling with excitement. The expert heartside is growing tension, the beginning of the end, glimpses of light closing behind you, a somber farewell to the version of you that didn't spend entire afternoons playing fucking Celeste mods. There is no story. There could never be a story with this many voices contributing to the final product. If it had a story, it would probably be much worse, and yet, The Celeste Spring 2020 collab feels like a singular work of art. I don't know how, but it does. The Grandmaster Heartside is so distinctly a destination for this story. It's so vast, so final. They call back to the little intro sequence at the end. It's so sweet, it's so nice, it feels so right, and in a way that you could only get with a work of art helmed by a commune's worth of designers, programmers, artists, and musicians. It might not be better than Celeste, or even really as good, but the sheer diversity of opinion here is something unique, beautiful. I am, frankly, astounded by the sheer dedication and communal spirit present. God fucking damn it, they made another one?